കുട്ടനാടൻ പുഞ്ചയിലെ കൊച്ചുപെണ്ണെ കുയിലാളെ കൊട്ടു വേണം കുഴൽ വേണം കുരവ വേണം വരവേൽക്കാനാള് വേണം കോടി തോരണങ്ങൾ വേണം വിജയശ്രീരാളിതരായി വരുന്നു ഞങ്ങൾ.
And my interests were also, because I was an outsider, very early on, by high school, I became very conscious of human rights. It started out with an interest in children's rights, because as a child, I felt I was not being treated correctly. And in the last 500 years, maybe even a little less, because of the coming together of the best of Eastern thinking, with the developments that happened in the Western world, created a world where minorities, for the first time, as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, had a stand, had feet to stand on. Could politics exist in the true sense of the word only in democratic societies? In a dictatorship, there's no politics. Real politics in the Greek term is what happens when competing ideas engage in the public sphere. The conservative societies, they don't care for liberalism, and they have exploited the weaknesses of this civilization to try to achieve what you had mentioned earlier, a return to a mythical, glorious past.
Hello, everyone. June 25th, 1975 holds a special significance in the memory of India. That was the day when the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency and put hundreds of thousands of opposition leaders, political activists in prison. Amongst them was my father, Professor Madhu Dandavate. But also, there was a special significance for that day for me and my classmates at the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. Besides being my 17th birthday, that was also our first day as students of NID. A 17-year-old boy from a small town, Quailon, in Kerala, Ashok Panikkar, was one of my classmates. Ashok Panikkar has been active conducting workshops, educating the youth in the area of critical thinking and conflict resolution through visual communication. 20 years ago, Ashok founded MetaCulture, through which he facilitated the management of complex conflicts arising out of diversity, interrace, interfaith relations, gay marriage, immigration, and government-company community disputes. Today, Ashok runs the Village Idiot Studio, a deliberately irreverent forum designed to demystify democracy, diversity, and interpersonal and societal relationships. Ashok communicates through posters. He wants to help people go past the usual polarizing issues such as racism, sexism, campaign finance, or gerrymandering. He wants people to rediscover what core demands of democracy, such as the ability to think for oneself while being able to simultaneously balance one's individual needs with that of the family, community, and nation. He hopes that these posters will generate constructive and difficult conversations. I bring to you Ashok Panikkar in a dialogue about his imagination of India's democracy, humanity, and his struggles in cultivating these values and this imagination amongst communities that are torn in conflict. So over to Ashok. So my first question to you is, when was this seed of these curiosities and passion that you're pursuing were sowed?
I'll try to keep this very short because in my book I'm writing about this, and my entire preface is really on this. And the best way to say it is, I changed schools 9 times in 12 years, over 6 different cities. And I stayed with my parents only for about 4 years in my entire life, in my schooling life. This meant that I was always an outsider. And if I remember correctly, you studied in boarding schools for a while.
Yeah.
In a boarding school, in a way, it's the law of the jungle. The strongest survive, and the others get bullied. And so I grew up being bullied in schools, and because I was always an academic misfit, another reason I got into a place like NID meant that the teachers also seriously were very cynical about me, and from a very early age. This meant that, and you're talking of the seeds and when they were sowed, this meant that I wasn't trying to be creative. I wasn't trying to be a rebel. I really didn't try anything. I had to survive outside of every mainstream, including my family. I was never part of my family. I saw my parents only for 4 weeks in a year. They didn't watch me grow up. So, and at NID too, I was one of the people who came, and I was not the only one, with absolutely zero visual skills. I couldn't draw, I couldn't paint, I wasn't a photographer. I could do none of that. I think people like Vikas made a mistake in selecting me because of my conceptual skills or whatever, if they could tap into that. So even at NID, I was the bane of people like Mahendra Bhai and others who wanted skills. And I struggled to acquire it even after 5.5 years. So I had to find my own language. In design itself, I had to find my own language. And I'll be honest, I was never a successful graphic designer or visual communicator because my interests were not in design per se. And so, and my interests were also because I was an outsider very early on. By high school, I became very conscious of human rights. It started out with an interest in children's rights because as a child, I felt I was not being treated correctly. I was critiquing in a very crude, childish way, critiquing the Indian educational system for its reliance on rote learning, for instance. In the seventh and eighth standard, and I would get hit by my mother because she felt that I was making excuses for bad grades. I probably was. So my critique of Indian society started with critique of Indian education. And by the time I reached high school, I was so upset and angry about the what I saw as the hypocrisy of middle class educated Indians. My family being part of that. So it's been a relentless one. I slowed down because of my need to earn a living through design in the India of the 80s. I couldn't actively do anything about it. But once I decided in 88 that I'm not cut out for design and professional design, I the political me came to the fore. And my first exhibition was really the only skills I had were graphics. It was an exhibition called Celebration, and I had it in Bangalore, and that is where I first started articulating my political or philosophic ideas. And the very next year, Salman Rushdie's book was banned in India. For some reason, I was angry as hell because it's like if you if you can ban India's at that time only Booker Prize winners book because of minority sentiments, imagine what the majority can do. So I'll just stop here. I can go on, but I won't. Feel free to edit
It's
this
wonderful.
anyway.
So I want to just make a comment. Now, this is a dialogue. This is not an
Right,
interview.
absolutely.
So I have known you for almost 50 years now, and I've seen you evolve. And if I look back and at more of our recent conversations, your words spew anger, but your soul, I feel, is a healer and a dot connector and a heart connector. And I see this very interesting dichotomy in your personality. Do you feel it?
I've been told that, but you are very generous to call me a healer because there are many people who don't see me as a healer. Professionally, in my conflict resolution work, which is now almost 25 years, I have actually been a professional healer, but leave that aside. How would I like to see myself? As someone who's trying to connect those dots. But I would be misrepresenting myself if I thought that was the way the world saw me. The world is wonderfully, wonderfully superficial in only listening to the tone of the words, not even the words themselves. And my anger is because we have succeeded in destroying an extraordinary civilization. I call it civilization. And I can't get over that. So thank you for calling me a healer. I try to be constructive, but I do come across either as um, sarcastic, satirical, mocking, or even angry. And I'm past caring anymore. I'm not trying to reach out to any particular demographic or target or please anyone anymore. I'm just, this is who I am. And if most people don't like me, and that's okay.
Okay, so I want to pick on something that you just said. You referred to destroying our civilization. And would that suggest to me that you do care for the civilization? You want to preserve it, nurture it, and build from it. And I want to just clarify for our audience, your reference to civilization, I'm assuming, is different from the current political dispensation of their mission to preserve our civilization. Is there a difference?
Totally. Frankly, I don't care at all for any civilization that might have existed 5,000 years ago. It's irrelevant because I'm a, I'm a, I'm a student of history. By that, I don't mean formal education, but I love history. And until about 500 years ago, life was very cruel. Life was absolutely based on the law of the jungle. And in the last 500 years, maybe even a little less, because of the coming together of, and I want to first say this, the best of Eastern thinking, the best, including Indian or Chinese or Buddhist or Hindu thinking, with the developments that happened in the Western world, starting with the Protestant Reformation, then the multiple European Renaissances, then the Enlightenment, European Enlightenment, then the Industrial Revolution, and finally, people are not going to like this when I say it, but the American hegemony after 1945 created a world where minorities, for the first time, as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, had a stand, had feet to stand on, could appeal for justice. There was no justice prior to that. Any justice was subjective. Rule of law is something that married all the best of Western civilization with the philosophic and spiritual softness of Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism. And it was magnificent. So when I talk of civilization, I am talking of the kind of civilization that was at its peak from the late 40s to, I want to say, the end of the 20th century. Since then, the very people who were invested in this civilization have played a very big role in trying to destroy it. It's not dead yet, but we've done a phenomenal job of corrupting every institution, every mechanism, and worst of all, every norm and trait of our culture. And I'm devastated, man. I'm devastated.
So, who or what do you hold responsible for this destruction?
I think, let me start by saying mea culpa, me primarily. I'm not arrogant enough to believe I have that kind of influence, but my own choices, which were based on individual autonomy and freedom, from high school days, but definitely through my 20s and 30s, I believe I have contributed to the weakening of the very values that I hold true. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. My social circle, my professional circles, my family has borne the brunt of my aggressive individualism, my aggressive following of my passion. All the things that I valued, I realize have had an impact on the very people I love that I hadn't factored in. Now, that's me. But why did I even mention this? Because it's easy to blame other people. Now, when I look at a macro level, Ashok is irrelevant. But the liberal societies have destroyed liberalism. The conservative societies, whether it's the Arab world, the traditional Indians, the traditional Chinese, they don't care for liberalism, and they have exploited the weaknesses of the civilization to try to achieve what you had mentioned earlier, a return to a mythical, glorious past. So from the left and the right, we have we are basically on our way to destroying any freedoms or rights that we have ever created. Now, I want to say that for me to blame anyone, whether it's Trump or Putin or Xi or Modi or anyone, is irrelevant, because my own choices were dangerous for my micro society. I'm part of the problem.
I get it. So, you do refer to politics in your conversations. So, you refer to politics, but you almost abhor the politics of the day and the politics as practiced by both ends of the spectrum. So, what, in your view, is the right kind of politics?
I'd like to, if I may, define politics because, firstly, I've totally given up on labels. I don't even call myself a liberal anymore because the word has been corrupted. So I can't talk of any particular kind of constructive politics. But politics is an interesting word, and I discovered this only about 7 to 10 years ago. Politics exists in the true sense of the word only in democratic societies. In a dictatorship, there's no politics. I mean, there might be the backroom machinations of different courtiers of the dictators playing one against the other. That's childish politics. Real politics in the Greek term is what happens when competing ideas, engage in the public sphere. This is very important politics. What has happened now is the right and the left have given up on this politics. The American political environment, I know you want to talk about India, but I'll just mention this. The American political environment is completely paralyzed. There is no politics. Even negotiation and trading off is considered selling out. I'll give you one example. My 12 years in India, the last stint, where I was running MetaCulture as a conflict management center, you may not, okay, yeah. I was astounded in the very first 2 years, 2005, 2006, to realize that the greatest opponents to my work were not big government, no, was not government or big business. It was the NGOs. The civil society actors were the ones who were threatened by my invitation to dialogue and negotiate. Because in their minds, and these are some of the biggest names in Indian civil society, in their minds, to negotiate with anyone in power was selling out. They wanted or they trusted only the process of disruption and protest. I am talking in the mid 2000s, way before Modi got on the national scene. I hold civil society as mostly responsible for the destruction of India's democracy, not the right wing. Because the right wing does what it always does. Because they don't care about democracy. They don't care about human rights. They only want majoritarian rule. That has always been the case historically and definitely in any part of the world. Civil society had a responsibility to play politics, which is essentially not about protest, even though protest is important in a democracy. It is about negotiation and dialogue. And they completely dropped the ball on that. Sorry, I get very
No, I like it.
excited.
I respect your thoughts. So that takes me to another question is, you are from Kerala. Recently, I was at the Kochi Biennale, and not talking about everything that I saw, but the one specific display was in a dilapidated house where students had created artifacts and displayed them. And a lot of them were expression of anger and pain. One of the students who was acting as a volunteer there came over to me and we got into conversation. And what he said to me was very powerful. He said to me is that whole of India is burning with fanaticism. Kerala is relatively saved from that. And he said, for me, it's because of education and conversations. He said, in Kerala, we still have our heads on the shoulder. We still are open to conversations and we are educated more than many other states. Now, he revealed to me something. He didn't talk about Marxist politics. He didn't talk about party politics. He didn't talk about conflict between Modi and the rest of the world. He just made a simple expression while explaining to me all the pain and frustration that was displayed on the wall. Do you have any comment on that?
I know this is a cliche, but I do have a love-hate relationship with my own ethnic, linguistic state. The more I live outside Kerala, the more I realize I am Malayali. Even though my knowledge of Malayalam is very limited, I can't read or write. I can speak it in a crude fashion. The roots are so deep. So and I cherish it. I really cherish it because growing up in Kerala was special. Of course, I grew up also in Delhi and Calcutta and Bangalore, but leave that aside. It was special because it was educated and there was an enormous awareness of human rights. enormous awareness of the right of everyone to dignity, which the moment I went to Ahmedabad for my college, I found it was completely missing in Gujarat. Okay, so I'm not saying it wasn't there at all, but it wasn't ubiquitous the way it was in Kerala. So I have to say, there's a part of me that really appreciates Kerala for being a very different kind of state. Having said that, I will not romanticize my state. It is one of the most, um despite the syncretic culture, and there's no question, Hindus, Muslims, Christians get along so much better than anywhere else. However, it is also extremely caste driven. All the education has only emphasized the caste differences. And secondly, I believe, and this is related to also my critique of Western democracies and Indian democracy. We have enshrined protest as the primary form of democratic expression, which is absolutely dangerous. Abs- Democracy is not protest. Protest is a valuable right in a democracy. But Kerala is the archetypal protest driven state. And that's not healthy for democracy. So, yeah, I love my state, because it made me who I am in many ways. My family at many levels is wonderful. I mean, they were so tolerant about my aggressive challenging of their own norms. And I would attack my relatives in my teens and 20s. They should have thrown me out a long time ago. But they tolerated me, I think, because of the Kerala open mindedness.
So,
And yet, yeah,
so
sorry,
one
go.
question. I'm sidestepping our conversation. When you were watching the title sequence of our video, when the music played out, what was happening inside you?
I felt very warm, very warm. It, it. I haven't heard that music for a long time, and it was like suddenly it was like Uday is tapping into something at my roots. I loved it.
You heard it growing up.
Of course, of course. And more than anything else, it was like, because I'm in Washington, D.C., I'm sorry that I don't have any Malayali friends here that I can visit and hear my own culture being manifested through art or music or anything else. Uh, it just suddenly made me feel very warm. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I think that that's what the purpose is in my entire project, is not to just treat uh, the human connection at an intellectual level. It's important. Discourse is important. Negotiations are important. Critical thinking is important. But to creating a fertile ground for hearts to connect with hearts is important. And arts, visual thinking, music, dance, all of that is as important as verbal communication.
Of course, absolutely.
If you remember, one day in the NID auditorium, we started a nonsensical song, and the whole auditorium joined us, and we sang and we gave a rhythm to it for almost 20 minutes.
It was initiated by you. I remember that.
Yes.
You lost an opportunity to become a rap artist or something.
But I think what is important is the kind of connection we felt. There was no thought, there was no idea, but there was a rhythm and tune that came from deep inside us.
Pure rhythm, pure rhythm, emotion, and harmony.
Absolutely. So let me go back to the next thing. What is an alternative to binary thinking?
So I'll try not to be very pessimistic. The expression that a pessimist is merely an optimist who got beaten up far too many times. So I think firstly, binary thinking is not all bad. It's not all that. This present day fascination with non-binary everything, including gender, is ridiculous. I think we take even non-binary to a ridiculous extent. But having said that, I know what you mean by non-binary or binary thinking. I think the problem with political binary thinking is that it doesn't take into consideration the complexity of human beings itself. We, I cannot be, however much I want to be, always good. I can't be always honest. I can't be always pure of heart or mind. I'm messed up. I'm messed up. And why am I messed up? Because my mind is controlled by my body. It's the hormones, the structure of my brain, the amygdala, the limbic system. These actually are constantly working against the person Ashok wants to be. So if I can't personally be on one end of a spectrum because my mind is my brain doesn't allow me to be completely one or the other, then in a political environment, all politics has to factor into the extraordinary limitations of the individual right. So any political system that tries to make human beings perfect or society perfect will become a tyranny. Islamic nations, fascism, communism, these are all totalitarian attempts to create perfect societies. So non-binary politics has to be a politics that recognizes that every citizen, including the strongest and the weakest, and the president or the prime minister, is capable of having bad days. And we have to be extremely tolerant of human foibles. One. Second, we need to be a little less stringent in our application of political theories and uh, strictures. So the only kind of alternative to a binary political environment is to recognize that we will never create a perfect society, that justice itself is a human construct. There cannot be perfect justice. And also to recognize that democracy itself is counterintuitive. There is nothing in the human brain that allows us to be genuinely open-minded. We are not. We are controlled by our fear impulse, and we are driven to always moving towards the people we are familiar with. That makes us biased. That makes us racist and xenophobic. Racism and xenophobia are not terrible things. They are natural things. And a great civilization is one that can temper those. But if we start destroying people and reputations and bringing down presidents and prime ministers because something they said was racist or sexist, we are going to destroy ourselves. So the idea of an alternative is to essentially be very modest about what kind of a society we can create, and to be very tolerant, not of minorities alone, but of even majority failings in trying to be democratic. This is something I mean, in my conflict resolution work, I saw it over and over again. The best willed, the organizations, communities, and I've watched this even in geopolitics, the most well-intentioned majority or dominant power groups fail very often. Best intentioned, but when they fail, we have no patience. We try to tear them down, saying, you are not democratic anymore. That's ridiculous. I am not always what I want to be. I don't know if this makes sense to you.
So I have a question. Next year, there's going to be an election in India. And here is an opportunity for every citizen to make a choice. If people were to embrace this open, forgiving, accommodating approach, I don't want you to evaluate people who are staking their claim to power. But my question is, what questions should citizens ask with this new mindset that you are prescribing before making choice of who to vote for?
Okay. So despite everything I've said, I'm going to contradict myself here. I believe the Indian polity is on the Indian state is so vulnerable right now. We don't have a choice. If we still have the vote in 24, we have to find a way to elect the opposition. Because we may not have another general elections after 2024 if the Hindutva forces consolidate. What I'm talking about is not for the present because the present is too badly damaged. It's like I'll give you an analogy. Uh, if a person has cancer, asking the person to change his lifestyle is not going to cure cancer. At that point, you need chemotherapy or radiation. India needs chemotherapy and radiation right now. So does the US. But after going through the process or simultaneously, while you do aggressive intervention, we have to start educating our population. 1.4 billion. How will we re-educate or educate 1.4 billion people? But we have to try to create the kind of society we want. So I mentioned society because you can't have a democratic state without a democratic society. And first, everything that you and I hold dear, open mindedness, critical thinking, compassion for the weak, all of that is only possible if the ordinary person has developed the appreciation of being accommodating at home, in the neighborhood, in the city, society, and nation. And that is going to take a few hundred years. Tocqueville, when he traveled around the US, and he wrote his book, two books on American democracy, he said the most powerful thing that he witnessed was that in the towns, little towns, you're talking before technology, before telegraph or communication media, ordinary people were debating what kind of a society they wanted. That they were attending town hall meetings in the cafes and in the bars or pubs. They would be engaging, arguing, and trying to understand the society they wanted to create, which is why by the time the 20th century came, America was far more developed as a democracy because there was a core of people that was capable of thinking democratically, which America has lost now. I just want to be very clear. America doesn't have it anymore. But it took about 200 years for America to create that. And India has had only 70, 75 years. In a way, Indian democracy is premature. Universal suffrage itself is highly premature. We were not ready for democracy. I'm grateful we had it when we were growing up. But you can't impose democracy from the top. You can't have people like Nehru, etc., or Gandhi who studied in the UK and, or in Ambedkar who went to Columbia with the most newfangled ideas, imposing this kind of a system or an extremely feudal society. This the rise of the right wing, and I'll stop with this. The rise of the right wing in India is to be expected.
So I have one question on that. India is deeply religious country. What is your understanding of the role of religion, either as a medium or a barrier to nurturing democratic spirit?
great question, because I have been an unbeliever all my life, from the age of 13 onwards. And I have always, and this is part of my learning, until about 10 years ago, I hated the idea of religion in the public sphere. I'm still very uncomfortable with the idea of religion, religious processions, loudspeakers, etc., from one religious community to another, pretty much attacking the environment. Having said that, my conversations with American Christians has opened my mind to the importance of religion if it allows for democratic values. And that's made me study American democracy a little more than I had done in the past. And I realized Christianity is deeply rooted in American democracy. People don't want to hear it today, but from the Constitution onwards, there is the idea of God. The word God exists in many, from the currency to everything else. It doesn't say Christian religion, no. But for the founders, and until about 100 years ago, the only operative religion was Christianity. And there's a particular friend I have, a new friend, who is, I want to say, a Christian fundamentalist. And he's a hardcore Democrat. But I don't mean the political party. He believes in the value of democracy, and he's a hardcore Christian. And in conversations with him, I have started appreciating how Christianity was a radical departure from the Roman ethos, the prevailing Roman ethos, and from the old religions, in that it privileged the individual human being and his relationship with God. And so I'm still figuring this out, but I do believe, even in India, we can use religion to create a culture, an ethos. Unfortunately, all traditional religions push people. It needn't be that way. I don't know enough about Hinduism to know whether Hinduism can play the role Christianity has done in the US in fostering democracy. Somebody who is more knowledgeable about that will have to answer that. But short answer to your broad question, I believe they're not incompatible, but they can be very dangerous to allow into the public space.
But in a multicultural, multi-religion, multi-faith India, is it safe for the majority religion to take a lead in creating that connection between God and democracy?
You are asking really powerful questions. And I want to say, if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I'd have said, to hell with the majoritarian religion. That's incompatible with democracy. Today, I'm older and I've taken far more beatings. So I'm going to say that trying to ignore any majority group is fatal to a democracy. We say in democracy, in democratic societies, we have to protect the minority. That's fine. That's necessary. But you cannot protect society if the majority group, whether it's race-based or ethnicity or language or religion-based, if we alienate the majority religion in this case, we cannot. If you and I and whoever is interested in Indian democracy, if we are serious about fostering Indian democracy, we have to find a way to co-opt and appeal to the better nature of the majority religion or Hindus in general. Because if we don't, we are not giving them any reason to stay in our democracy. Here's the thing. Democracy is not just about minorities. It is something majority groups, powerful groups see value in and therefore put in place. A minority group cannot establish a democracy. Only the most powerful, the most dominant group can establish a democracy. It can be a handful of leaders like Nehru and our founding fathers in India, founding fathers and mothers. But they were at that point the most powerful. Minorities can never sustain democracy. They can ensure they don't destroy it by being unreasonable. But it's only a majority group. And in India, we have to accept if we want democracy, we have to find a way to carry the 800 million to billion Hindus for whom their religion is very important.
And can you envision a future where the majority Hindus see a path forward that is not a path that is prescribed by the champions of Hindutva?
I think it will take at least 5 generations. I can see. But and again, I don't want to be pessimistic or I don't want to sound like a doomsday prophet. But I want to say that my understanding of global democracy is that we are past peak democracy and we are going down everywhere in the world, including the much talked about Scandinavian countries. They can't sustain uh, their politics or their culture for very long. We are all going down at some point, and it's almost hopeful. I'm being hopeful. At some point, we are going to hit the bottom. It can be an economic collapse globally, it can be an ecological collapse, it can be another virus, it can be another war, a global war. But we will need something to shake us out of our complacency and our anger towards our enemies. America, I'm here now for 7 years, 6.5 years. And what is most distressing about American democracy are not the Christian fundamentalists or the Trump supporters. It is the progressives who are determined to refashion America in their own image. They are the most intolerant people I've ever encountered. They have to recognize democracy is not about creating the perfect, most progressive world. They have to realize they have to carry the ordinary Christian white American. But unless there's a real crisis, Trump was not a big enough crisis in 2017. We need a big crisis, a really big crisis to wake us up. And unfortunately, that's what humans are. Unless we are slapped in the face so many times, we don't wake up. It took me 30 years of being an arrogant liberal, determined to lead my life according to my passion, for me to realize that I was causing damage amongst the people I loved.
That's beautiful. So I want to wrap up the conversation, and I want to ask you one last question is that I'm sure you talk to young generation. And when I talk about young generation, I mean like maybe between 15 and 25. When you are in conversation with them, amongst your thoughts, which thoughts open the doors of their mind to a more accommodative conversation?
Again, a very good question. I would say it depends on the context in which I'm talking. Right now, to be completely candid, I'm not working with the very young at this point in time. I do have students attending my courses who are between 20 and 30. And when I when they realize how fragile the world is and how fragile our freedoms and rights are, it's like a cold shower. It's like, oh my God. When they realize that beating up on Modi or Trump is not going to solve the problem. But that is the first thing that has to happen. They have to get away from the idea of one enemy. If you remove that enemy, everything is going to be okay. I mean, humans are like that. We centralize all our problems on one person who, if only we could remove, everything would be okay. And when they realize that, there's the opening to a dialogue, there's an opening to learning, but it's a very difficult path to even get to that place. There are no easy ways.
And one last question. Imagine you were standing on the last day of your life. And if you were to look back, what kind of a scenario would make you feel you did cause a small dent in how the world operates? What kind of a change would you want to see at that point?
I've not thought of that. So, since you're asking me, I would like to think that if I could hear from one or two people, if they would come to me or write to me and say, Ashok, after your course or after knowing you, here's what I have been doing in my own community, I think I'd be very gratified.
Wonderful. And I can say, with all your anger and frustration, with the way we are all headed towards the doomsday, I don't think that reality is impossible.
Can I ask you the same question back?
Yes. I am in an entirely different framework. I'm seeking more of, it's not religious, but spiritual transformation of humans. More on the lines of what Gandhi tried to do. And if I saw around me, in my immediate surroundings, more compassion, more caring, more listening, I would be happy.
Thank you. And, I didn't mention this earlier, but today is my birthday. So this conversation is in a way very timely, because it's all like all birthdays, and today I'm 65. I'm forced to ask myself some really tough questions. And that last question that you asked is particularly appropriate. And your answer makes me hope for both of us that we are only 65. And hopefully we have a little more time before we reach that last day. And I'm hoping that, both of us can see some of what we hope for.
Thank you. And Ashok, this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoyed it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to say one last thing, because it's celebrating, this series is to celebrate your father's 100th birthday. I think I only met him once when I visited your house in Delhi. I haven't ever talked to your dad. I did talk to your mother once. And I have to say, and I really mean it, when I look back at Indian politics, and if I were to identify genuinely sincere, humble, and yet influential people, I can't think of more than 4 to 5. And your dad is definitely one of them. And I want to say something. You're very, very, very fortunate to have had parents as wonderful as yours.
And I would also add my mother to that list. And I think in that, my framework of caring, compassionate person, I've seen a lot more in that. And I think my expectations from the world have come from her.
You're a very lucky person. You're a very lucky person, and I really mean it. Because most of us, I mean, me and my peers, Our parents were regular middle class professionals, and that they gave us some really powerful values. But your parents were, both of them were special, were very special.
Well, thank you, Ashok, and happy birthday. I hope you get to do something fun today. And wish you all the best. I am your great admirer, and I hope you hold on to that steam and passion and relentlessness.
കൊച്ചു പെണ്ണെ കുയിലാളെ